Does anybody remember even just one thing that we talked about last week? If so, go ahead and raise your hand first. Let me know. Listening. Yes, that's what it was titled, and that was the first invitation from the Lord. I love it. Anything else from last week? It was like we started real strong, and then it was like nothing. Good. I'm happy to run with that. Listening is what we were talking about last week. The next thing that I want us to do is I'm going to put 5 different images on the screen, and this is not a raise your hand thing. This is a shout, just when you have a thought. Every image represents something. I want you to tell me the first thing that comes to mind when you see the image. So, first one.
Indianapolis.
I like a little bit of a different answer. That was good. So I heard a lot of Colts, heard a lot of Indianapolis. Next image. America. I heard George Washington. What else was there?
Betsy Ross.
Flag, Betsy Ross. Man, that's Zionsville education right there. Yes. What? I'm surprised nobody said freedom. No. It's all just America. All right, next one. That's an easy one. All right, next one. Very good. I heard like what it literally is. Star of David. I heard Judaism. What else did you say?
Triangles.
Triangles. Yeah, Shayla, you have to talk to him later. All right, and last but not least. Anything else for handicap? A wheelchair, that'd be correct. What did you say?
Parking.
Parking, yeah, that actually is really good. All right, so congratulations, you guys did it. Each one of those images brought something to mind. And so last week we talked about listen, love God, love people. Today is the first Sunday in a 4-week series on Colossians. And throughout Colossians 1, you're going to see this theme of how Jesus is the image of the invisible God. And so what I want you guys to do first, though, is I want you all to shut your eyes and get comfortable, because you have your eyes shut for 9 verses. Instead of having you read along with me, I'm going to read these 9 verses over you. But while you listen, what I want you to simply do is ask yourself, what is Jesus teaching me about himself? Or said just another way, what do I learn about Jesus from this passage? So I'm going to have Heath do the slides for me, but just listen and consider. The Son is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For in him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities, all things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. He is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning and the firstborn from among the dead, so that in everything he might have the supremacy. For God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in him, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether things on earth or things in heaven, by making peace through his blood shed on the cross. Once you were alienated from God and were enemies in your minds because of your evil behavior. But now he has reconciled you by Christ's physical body through death, to present you holy in his sight, without blemish and free from accusation. If you continue in your faith, steadfast and firm. Is that the last one? And do not move from the hope held out in the gospel. This is the gospel that you heard and that has been proclaimed to every creature under heaven, and of which I, Paul, have become a servant. And you can open your eyes. So if last week we said to love God, you have to know God, this week is all about to know God, we have to know who Jesus is. And when we think Jesus is the image, the disciples had a leg up on us who were with him on earth because they got to walk down the street with him. And for us, we don't get to do that. Ephesians 1 says that Jesus is seated at the right hand of God the Father right now. So we don't get to talk and interact with Jesus in the exact same way that they did, but we still have a passage like this that's telling us a lot about him. And so what I want to ask you guys is, what, if anything, did you hear about Jesus in that passage? It's a tough one. Did you hear anything that told you about who Jesus is? Yes, sir.
Firstborn.
Did you say the first Lord?
Firstborn.
Firstborn, yes. You picked up on one of the tough things. Yeah, firstborn over all creation. What else did you hear? It's okay if you don't remember the exact wording. What if you think of, is there any descriptor word that comes to mind where you're like, Jesus is this, Jesus is that? Yes, sir.
I suppose a leader or like a master.
I like that. Yes, Jesus is leader. I like that. I'll give you one more, and then this actually sets the pace well for the message because we will dive in to all these things about Jesus. One other thing.
The head of the body.
Head of the body. Awesome. So I heard Jesus is a leader. I heard Jesus is head of the body, and that Jesus is firstborn over all creation. So one thing I want to point out is that Jesus is the most powerful person in the world. And most powerful people, what they do is they shut themselves away from people, right? Because the money, the affluence, it allows you to be separate from everyone else around you. But instead, who Jesus is, because his power combines with his love, all of a sudden Jesus comes to us and tells us who he is. So you've got something like verse 17, Jesus is before all things, and in him all things hold together. So he's supreme, he's over things that are seen and unseen. And what do you think about our culture? Is our culture one that focuses on what is seen or what is invisible? Very good, exactly. Our culture is really good at the physical, material world in front of us, and we're real bad about acknowledging a supernatural world. We also know that Jesus is head over every ruler and authority, from like Donald Trump to the Queen of England. I feel bad that I put them just together right there. But he is over both of them. Verse 18 says Jesus is the firstborn over all creation, which I think Stephen said that. Does anyone want to take a stab at what does that mean? Because I think it's a weird phrase. I hope I'm not alone in that. Like firstborn over all creation. If you understand that fully, props to you. Because I think it's tough. But can somebody like throw a guess at what you think that means? You guys are lucky you're wearing masks. So students will often ask me, a life group leader, or Brad, they'll say, well, what was Jesus doing before the Christmas story? And that's my answer to your question of Jesus is firstborn over all creation. Christmas story happens, Jesus is born, but what happened before all of that? Well, we learned in Colossians 1 that Jesus is firstborn over all creation, and that by him and through him all these things were made. So that means that when you're in Genesis 1, like way back to the creation story, Jesus was there. He was a part of all of it. So who here has heard of the word the Trinity? Good. It's pretty good. So Trinity is simply God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit. And so if you're like, hey, I want to find out about the person of Jesus in the Trinity, you go to a passage like Colossians 1 and it tells you. So how else do we find out who Jesus is? The first thing we find out about Jesus is through the Bible. So you can throw that up. And then the second one is find out who Jesus is through the church. And so Paul, he wrote a ton about who Jesus is through all these letters. He wrote 13 letters of the New Testament. And throughout all of it, he will often describe the church as the human, physical body. So it allows me to say something like, okay, so in the church, Shelley's like the heart, and we've got someone like Christian's like the hand, Crystal's the foot, Shayla's the back. Like, everybody is a part of the body, and it's all one, but then each person is unique. Each person is different. They have their own role. And so if you see, I'm going to find out who Jesus is through his church. A big part of that is that you jump into the church and you realize that I'm going to find out a lot of who Jesus is by his followers. And I'm going to learn something different about Jesus from Kendra than I'm going to maybe learn from Sam Miller over there. But each person of the church, if you are a follower of Jesus, they can teach you something. Now for me, I am of course not Jesus, right? In your head, Shelley's laughing, in your heads you're all like, you would make a crappy Jesus. Don't worry, I'm allowed to say it.
Not in my head, I definitely think that.
Thank you, Caleb. There we go. See, we're warming up. This is good. It's week 2. Yeah. So I would make a crappy Jesus, but since I am a follower of Christ, I can still then offer you something about who Jesus is, the same way that you in turn can offer something to me about who Jesus is. So if you want to find out You got to jump into the church. And what I want to encourage you guys with is if you're here already, or anyone who's watching online, you're already doing a big part of it. Because Acts 2 says, devote yourselves to prayer. Devote yourselves to community. Be in the Word and be devoted to teaching. All of those things is what you guys are already doing. Last but not least, so if it was find out who Jesus is through the Bible, find out who Jesus is through the church, you're going to find out who Jesus is through relationship. Find out who Jesus is through relationship. Now you will never, ever, ever, ever know who Jesus is if you are not in relationship with him. So last week we talked about the gospel. And so this week we're going to talk about the gospel again. Simply because it is through the good news of Jesus and putting your faith in him alone that you will have that relationship. Many of you, though I don't believe all of us in this room, but many of us have already done that. And then if not, my encouragement to you is simply that today can be the day of salvation. And myself or your life group leader or Brad would love to talk to you about it. But then for anyone who says, okay, I've crossed the line of faith, right? I went from what Paul described as evil, alienated, God's enemy, and I am now crossed over to life where there is freedom and holiness and without blemish. If I've already done that, what is this relationship supposed to be like? And I believe that your relationship with Jesus is either going to be growing towards, or it's going to be growing away. So the trick is that we like to think that it can be static, that it could be neutral. Well, last December, I had a meeting downtown Indianapolis, and when I was driving, I realized that my car was almost out of gas. But I was like, certainly, I can get downtown and back to church, easy peasy. Well, on my way back up on I-65 North, I'm driving up a hill, and my car comes to a complete stop. I am out of gas. And if you guys, some of you drive, some of you don't, being on I-65 where there's about this much space to pull over and semi-trucks are bulldozing by and your car is literally like shifting with everyone who passes, it's scary. So I get into the passenger side, I crawl out of my car, and I was this close to calling like somebody, like I need a gas can, I need something, but I look down the ravine and I see like a collection of houses. I'm like, well, the only thing I can do is I'm just going to start praying. I'm like, Lord, I need one of these houses to have a gas can because I got to get back to work. I walk down. The first house I get to, knock on the door. I'm sorry, sir, this is really awkward. Like, you see that car up there at the top of the ravine? That is my car. I got stuck on the highway. No, I'm not here to kill you, but I really need you to like check to see if you have a gas can because I can really use the gas. And the cool thing is the guy was like, I have my work truck right here and a big red gas can totally full. And I'm like, no way, this is awesome. So there's me, like, I take the big gas can, climb back up the ravine, fill it in. And like, you're tempting fate every time you're standing that close to the highway. Fill it in, go back down the ravine. Thank you, sir, can I pay you? And he didn't want me to pay him anything. I go back up and I drive on my way. Brad will remember that story. I share that with you because anyone in their right mind knows that when I was stuck in place on the side of the highway, that was not good, right? Was I going backwards? No. Was I going to get to my destination? No. There was no, like, backwards or staying still was not going to get me anywhere of where I needed to be. So what we have to come to terms with is, if we are a Christ follower, there is no such thing as just standing in place. Because we are either going to grow towards, or we're going to grow away. And what I want to tie in as we finish up, if you do have your Bibles, look at just verse 22 with me. This is Colossians 1, verse 22. And this is what I would point to say that your relationship with Jesus cannot be neutral. Jesus has reconciled you if you continue in your faith, established and firm, not moved from the hope held out in the gospel. Jesus has reconciled, which means made you right. Jesus has made you right if you do these things. Now you might say, but what about grace? Like you just said that salvation is by faith alone and that you can't earn your way to heaven. and I stand by that. The difference, though, is this here is a warning about the nature of relationship. All right? So this sort of warning, it's very similar to something else that Jesus said in Matthew 7. And these warnings are not here to shame us or to scare us. They are to paint a picture of what relationship is like. In Matthew 7, Jesus said, "Not everyone who says to me, 'Lord, Lord,' will enter the kingdom of heaven. Only he who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. Many will say to me on that day, 'Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and in your name drive out demons and perform many miracles?' Then I will tell them plainly, 'I never knew you. Away from me, you evildoers.'" What Jesus is talking about, that's a picture of growing away from the Lord, right? To the point where we have to ask ourselves, like, do I even really know Jesus? But once again, the warning is not shame or fear. It is simply that Jesus is the most important relationship that you can have in your life. And when I chose, like as a 16-year-old, to follow Jesus and give my heart to him, that was the biggest and best decision I could have ever made. But it means that we're all going to be in different places. So what I want you to do is go ahead and pull out the note card. Hopefully you can still find it. So we're going to do a couple of things. All of it will involve writing. And for now, don't put your name on it. At the end, I will at least invite you to consider letting us know who it is. But the first thing I want you to do is you're going to identify yourself being in one of 4 places. And I actually add one since I had Keith do the slides. So you're going to briefly think of where am I at with Jesus out of these 4 options. But you can throw the first 3 on the screen. So you are either growing towards Jesus, you are growing away from Jesus right now, you are away but willing, meaning that you know, like, hey, this is not a great season for me with the Lord, but I'm willing, I want to take a step. And then the last option would actually be simply, I am not in a relationship with Jesus at all. And I know when you're in church and you're in like youth group, you're like, why would I tell a pastor that? And it's because there is no judgment here. Like, it is safe space. Hopefully we can convey to you as pastors and your life group leaders that, like, we would rather know this is where I'm at with Jesus. So with no music and not Ian talking at all, I'm going to briefly let you just identify where am I at right now. You can say toward, thanks Keith, you rock. Toward, away but willing, or just not in it. So I'll be quiet for a moment. Consider where you're at. You can keep writing or considering. Don't have to put your name on it yet. But then, Keith, can you skip to the slide with 3 questions on it? So every year in student ministry, and especially for you guys as high schoolers, we want to hear from you things that we can be praying towards that will then direct our prayers. And this year, we're really excited. We're going to do some sort of monthly prayer update, probably for our staff and for parents who are interested in praying for you guys. But what I would love for you guys to do is to answer, do you see where that is? So I want you to consider these 3 questions, and I actually am we're going to end by having a song on just so that you can kind of just center for a bit. I know that I really need music to be able to concentrate. And I don't need you to answer all 3 of these. I don't think you got space to answer all 3. But what it is trying to draw out from you guys is how do you present something that you want to be prayed over when you maybe don't always have the words to say or the vocabulary, you don't know exactly how to frame your prayers. That's totally okay. That's what we're here for. But what we would love to get from you today is for you to write down like, hey, I want to grow in this way. That's why we asked that question of like, where do you want to be at the end of the school year? Or to drive you to focus on prayers for yourself and not just praying over your family, which is awesome, praying over your friends, which is equally awesome, but learning to pray for yourself and what the Lord is doing. You might think, like, what do I want to have happen in my life that only God can do? Like the big things where you're like, this is miracle level, I really need God to do it. You can answer that. Or simply, what do you want to have others pray over you this year that would pertain to God's prayer? And so you can answer those as we listen to this song. No rush. This little box that says prayer, we're like real smart up in here. It's like real smart. You can drop it in there, but I'm circling back. If you want it to remain anonymous, awesome. No judgment, totally fine. If you would be willing to let me and or Brad see it and know that it was you, then I would love for you to put your name on it. Once again, safe space. If you're uncomfortable, totally fine. But if you would like us to know, we will never tell it, like, we're not going to call up your parents and be like, guess what Brandon asked for prayer for? That is not how this is going to work. But just think about how in one Sunday, we're going to get a window into where you guys are at with Jesus. That's pretty cool. And then we'll have some prayer directions. And so the song that I chose, it's under that prayer prompt thing. I actually just listened to this new album by Hillsong Young and Free yesterday, and this song is called New Thing. And that's been so important to us as a staff during this season. And so before we dismiss you all to life groups, I want you to listen to the song, consider these questions, and then when you are done with your note card, you can drop it in here and quietly return to your seats. So let's do it.